go ahead and get started. Again, everyone, thanks for showing up. This is our quarterly webinar through CSHE. My name is Joe Grothman. I'm the Director of Facilities at UCI Health. I'm also help out with CSHE as the Education Chair. So helping out the group, just setting all these things up. Today we have a really exciting talk from JLL. We have two speakers, George Mills and Rich Park. I'm going to introduce them real quick, but before I do, this talk today, you can ask questions as they come up. Feel free to either put them into the chat or just raise your hand and ask a question. They're, not too fancy about wait until the end or anything. So it's just our style. We appreciate that, but we look forward to any of your questions. So please don't hesitate. This is being recorded. It'll be on CSHE later on. So if you find this information interesting and want to pass it on, please do so. And we're also always reminding people to become a member of CSHE if you have not yet. And if this is your first time here, welcome. We hope you enjoy it. So I'm going to introduce our team and then hand it over to him. So I'll start with Mr. Rich Park. Rich is the Regional Director for ATG, covering all of California, Arizona, and Nevada. He works with healthcare clients on regulatory compliance solutions for facilities such as asset management, life safety drawings, authority having jurisdiction documentation, environment of care rounding, PICRA and permitting, fire drill and generator testing, space and square footage drawings, drawing archives, utility mapping, fire alarm inventory management, CMMS system consultation, and more, if that's not already enough. His professional background is in commercial real estate and facilities technologies, and he earned his bachelor's degree from the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. And Mr. George Mills, a gentleman who probably doesn't need an introduction, but I will go ahead and give it anyway. Mr. Mills is Director of Technical Operations at JLL, and in his role, he provides expertise over the company's healthcare program, supporting account teams with innovation and program development, while ensuring achievement of higher reliability goals. Leading the healthcare platform, he has a robust management approach to the physical environment. George also provides training in life safety code, environment of care requirements, ligature risk management, fire-related device testing, RPI, and others. George is a former director of the Department of Engineering at the Joint Commission. In this role, he provided standard interpretation and education to the Joint Commission surveyors and accredited organizations. Also previously, George served as senior engineer for the Standards Interpretation Group in the organization's Accreditation and Certification Operations Division. A nationally recognized speaker and author, George has over 30 years experience in healthcare setting. Prior to the Joint Commission, he was Director of Facilities, held national positions related to code and standards, including Director of Codes and Compliance for CSHE, and has served as a consultant. He also has experience in the construction and industry and structural steel fabrication. Mr. Mills is a fellow with the American Society of Healthcare Engineering, Engineering of CSHE, a fellow with the Association of Advancement of Medical Instruments, and a certified healthcare facilities manager, a certified energy manager, certified healthcare safety professional, and a certified hospital operations professional. He is also former president of HESNI, a local chapter of CSHE. Mr. Mills earned an MBA from the California Coast University in Santa Ana, California. That's where I'm from and that's where I live. That's awesome. So I will hand it over to you, gentlemen. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you, George, or thank you, Joe, and thank you, George, for presenting for us. And I think without further ado, we'll get into the presentation. George, if you can take it away. And as Joe said, please feel free to raise your hand for any questions or comments while the presentation is going on. And I will also be monitoring the chat for any questions. So feel free to put them in there as well.
All right. Well, thank you, Joe. Thank you, Rich. It's a privilege and an honor to be here with you all. I've always enjoyed my time with CSHE when I've spoken in the past. So hopefully this will be helpful. I was asked to do a session on zone maintenance, so I plan to do that. But a couple of weeks ago, I attended a Joint Commission executive briefings and heard Dr. Perlin speak. And Dr. Perlin is the new CEO and president of the Joint Commission. And he had three things that he shared with the group. I thought I would just real quickly touch on those. I think they really set a new cadence for the Joint Commission. So if you bear with me just a moment here before you get into zone maintenance, I do want to kind of touch on these. The first issue that he really spent a lot of time on was health equity. And then he spent time on environmental sustainability and then workforce issues. So under health equity, the Joint Commission has created a new standard in the leadership chapter. And there's 6 EPs to this. The first EP is really targeted to leadership, somebody being in charge and leading the health equity in the organization. And I think nobody's surprised that health equity is the #1 topic in the world right now today, with equity and diversity and these things. So the key here is that senior leadership needs to be running this and piloting and pushing this forward, but they also need to have help from the rank and file pushing the same agenda forward. So you'll see that the main focus is on the social needs of the patient and how they assess and are evaluated for those needs. And the reason I shared this, and I thought this was important for us to hear as facilities, is where does the patient live? Where is the patient housed? They're in our facilities, they're in our environment. And that environment needs to really have an eye towards the social needs of the patient, whether it's the colors and the things that we choose to augment the space, but really everything is going to be pointed back to that built environment, I think. So it's important that we have a hand in that and are sensitive towards patients and their diverse backgrounds and things in their environment. And then, of course, the next 4 really deal with putting that into practice with a data analysis. And then from that comes an action plan to improve the process. And then the stakeholders are informed of what's going on. So, but again, I think the key to health equity from our perspective is what's going on in that built environment. Is it conducive to the needs of the social needs of the patient and how we set that up? The next thing that Dr. Perlin talked about was environmental sustainability. And when Herman McKenzie and I had lunch a couple of weeks ago, and he mentioned that this was the big buzzword at the Joint Commission, we kind of both wondered where was he going to go with decarbonizing of healthcare. Well, the Joint Commission has signed the charter with Washington, recognizing that by 2050 they're going to be there as well. And they have some steps between now and then, 2030 being a milestone for them. And what Dr. Perlin talked about was the stuff we do and the stuff we do and the stuff we consume and the stuff we buy. Those are his words. And I thought this was kind of neat to see that that he's not too high and lofty to be able to talk terms that we understand, but he looks at the stuff we do on a day-to-day basis that generates energy use and consumption and things like that, and things that we consume. But I think he spent a lot of time on things that we buy. And he mentioned that there's now a new carbon label to things that we buy through sourcing and whatnot. So my encouragement to all of you is as we're acquiring different things, whether it be for our cooling towers or energy use or anything like that we're doing in our systems and our buildings, and that let's be sensitive to the carbon environment, the consumables and things that we're doing to pollute and not pollute, and be green conscious. So I think it's exciting to see that. But I think in more practical terms, and I haven't heard this officially from Joint Commission, but it has to make me wonder if they're going to be also looking at regionalizing survey activity rather than flying people that live in the West Coast out east or the East Coast out west. Maybe they can start reducing some of the carbon footprint by regionalizing the survey activities. If they did talk about having an 18-month touch point that would be a non-credited event where if you want to have survey activity at mid-cycle, they'd be able to do that. And it kind of leads me to think that the Joint Commission, being as innovative as they are, that perhaps they would look at regionalizing the survey activities and then having that same regional survey team be available for the mid-cycle. So I think there's some exciting things that could come forward with this environmental sustainability out of the Joint Commission. And operationally, I see how it could really help them and help the world at large, reducing some of that air travel and some of that and moving things much more regionalized. So more to come from that. That's not at all from the Joint Commission. That's just my own hunch, my own speculation. But I wouldn't be surprised if that's kind of the direction that we see coming in the near future from the Joint Commission as well, in a way to reduce the carbon footprint by reduction of some of that travel that they do. And the next thing they talked about was workforce. I thought it was interesting. The Joint Commission is aware of and has concern for staff burnout. You know, we've coming out of COVID and the many long hours that nursing staff, clinical staff put in, but also our staff, you know, setting up temporary centers for care and all things we've done over the past couple of years. It's really strained a lot of our staff and a lot of our senior leadership and a lot of our mid-level leadership as well. So some of the concerns with staff burnout is aware of by the Joint Commission. And so as they've talked to hospital system leadership and some other folks that are in the field, they got a real sense that there's too many bureaucratic requirements that take time from staff performing patient care issues. In other words, if they're filling out things or doing things that are being driven by an accrediting organization that takes away from clinical care delivery, shame on us for requiring that. And so the Joint Commission is kind of aware of that. So they've started a new initiative that they're calling a mega review. The mega review is going to be looking at standard requirements that are above and beyond the requirements to do patient care delivery. And they have a goal to eliminate some non-value standards. So they're going to look at the entire accreditation manual, leadership, patient rights, environment of care, life safety, emergency management. All of the chapters are going to go under a review for this. Currently, so far, they've removed 54 certifications, replaced them with 6 different programs. But they felt that the certifications, although they were valued and they're a neat thing to have available, they do take a lot of staff resources, a lot of staff time to do those certifications. So they felt like by removing those, that might be one way that they can lessen some of the day-to-day work the accreditation team does at the sites as well. They revised the emergency management chapter. They reduced from 124 to 60 some EPs and standards. So they feel that that was really the first model of what they want to do for a reduction and a relook at what's going on in all the chapters. Their cadence is they hope to roll out a change every January and every July. So every 6 months, you should see an alert or an update of what's going on. I strongly recommend that you look at the pre-publication section of the Joint Commission standards chapters to see what changes are being made. If you go there right now today, in fact, you'll see their environment of care and life safety chapters. There is some change to language to some of the EPs there. I think 6 or 7 major changes. So you do want to be aware of the pre-pub section of the Joint Commission website and go there. One thing to keep in mind with the mega review and the things that they hope to do is there's some things they cannot touch. The things that CMS, OSHA, and NFPA have established as fixed requirements, they're obviously not able to modify or change those at all. So there is some limits to what they can do and what they can reduce and what they can move forward with. And certainly the K-tags and things like that are going to be limiters to them. But the good news is coming out of CMS as well, is they're also looking at some of the requirements that they've had over the years and looking for opportunities to reduce some of the requirements from CMS as well. So hopefully with the CMS moving towards that way, Joint Commission actively moving towards that way, we could see some reduction in some of the things that they require us to do that we just scratch your head and say, why am I doing this? Those things that are locked in place, NFPA, testing frequencies and that, those would not change and not be subject to change, but some of the other things may be. And so we'll watch for what's going on there. And then lastly, Dr. Perlin shared their vision for the accreditation survey of the future, where certainly the basis is the CMS and OSHA and NFPA requirements. Those are things that can't be changed. And they really drive as a foundation or a fundamental requirements of that. But then they want to move much more into questions of policy of interest and understand more of the key issues like equality and equity and emergency preparedness and really organizations' resilience, and look at the policy that we have that drives our decision-making process at our sites. And then the distinction and looking for opportunities to recognize markers of excellence. I think it's always been frustrating at the Joint Commission that they've never recognized the good things that we do, but always keyed in on the misses and the deficiencies in that. So they hope to move forward towards much more of a markers of excellence where they can recognize healthcare systems and single sites as far as the good things that are happening, and really helping learn more from us and from us to learn more from the Joint Commission. So you should see a little bit more collegial efforts coming out of the Joint Commission. Not the rubbing shoulders like happened back in the 90s, but certainly much more of a collegial feel towards the survey process where come let's reason together kind of a thing like that. So I'm kind of excited about what Dr. Perlin was sharing, and I wanted to share this with you. I know that you, as a chapter and as a state, have been pretty active getting some Joint Commission updates in that, and you've had a couple already, and you have another one coming up. But I did want to key in on some things that I felt was really significant coming out of the Joint Commission. And I think this really is an exciting time for them to move in this direction. Dr. Perlin really seems to be proactive in his thinking and really willing to think out of the box and move things forward with that. So it's exciting to see some of the moves that he's making in that area as well. So with that said, let's move into zone maintenance, which is what Rich had indicated to me that you want to talk about. And so I'm going to run through our zone maintenance program. Zone maintenance, in my mind, is really the solution to managing facilities, So I'm going to give an overview of what the program would look like, and then we'll talk a little bit about building maintenance program, which is at the center of this, and then barrier management, which will prevent future problems, I believe. And then the last part of the session will be on implementing the program. How do you implement it? JLL has given me the kind of a test lab to work on this. And we put zone maintenance in some sites and it's failed. And we've learned some things from those failures, and we've taken another run at it. And we have it now going in, and it's going in successfully. And we're finding that the nursing staff, clinical staff really like it because they now have a mechanic that they can grab a hold of. The staff like it. The folks that are zone mechanics have really embraced it. And they're also supported by other folks. So you'll see, hopefully in the next 35, 40 minutes or so, the program, how we put it in place, some pieces to it. And then when we get into the implementation section, we'll talk about some nuts and bolts that'll drive it. And again, as Joe mentioned earlier, if something doesn't make sense to you or you want to talk about it more, feel free to interrupt me now, or we will have some time at the end of the presentation to do some Q&A as well. So either way, whatever you're comfortable with that. So briefly, an overview. The purpose of zone maintenance program is to create an environment of care that reduces the hospital-acquired infections of patients and visitors. We believe that if we have a zone mechanic parked in the space, that they're going to be able to keep an eye on things like pressure relationships and differentials, and making sure that the physical environment is being maintained in the right way so that patient care delivery can be carried on without any concern for the built environment. The zone mechanic will assist in facilitating any corrective life safety behavior. So if we see as a zone mechanic doors being blocked by whatever, they'll move the cart out of the way that's blocking the door or these kind of things, and they'll work with nursing staff to really help them be aware of the built environment in the world, both in the area of patient care delivery and in compliance with that. The scope of the zone mechanic is to interface with clinical care team. Kind of the easiest way to look at it is what we've always had with EBS, being assigned to nursing units, and they're always there and they have that presence. We want to have a similar presence with the zone mechanic, where they're part of the solution, that they are looking for opportunities to repair things before work order is written, so that we're kind of ahead of the curve on that. Their focus is to conduct scheduled, planned inspection and maintenance of their areas. So we have a very robust program. We use the ATG rounding tool, has a separate module for zone maintenance. So the zone mechanic has a way that they can be guided through their space to make sure it's being done. Any repairs that are done in the zone are identified, and of course they're tracked through a computerized maintenance management system, because we do want to track what is being done and corrected by them. The good thing is the zone mechanic is writing the correct work orders rather than having a clinical person take time to do that, and getting into the system and then responding to the needs of the zone occupants. So there's 4 fundamental components to the program. First is to conduct scheduled formal inspection, maintenance, repair program, which is our building maintenance program. So zone maintenance starts out as zone repair. First thing we have to do is get our zones where they need to be. And then repairing things, we're getting wires off pipe, we're patching holes. So the first walkthrough or the first phase of your zone maintenance program is gonna be very labor intensive. It's gonna be very slow going. You're gonna be plodding through, fixing 30 years, 40 years of bad maintenance in the area and getting it where it needs to be. And then we move into zone maintenance mode, where once the building is built to where we want it to be, we move much more into maintaining that zone. Excuse me. And guiding this is the building maintenance program. I'll talk more about that and go into some specifics in a few minutes. Then we respond to any needs of occupants by the zone mechanic. The zone mechanic does participate in the daily huddles. We work the clinical team and we explain that he or she might have several zones, several nursing units in their zone. And so what we do is when the zone mechanic gets to the huddle, then the huddle usually stops what we're talking about, gives attention to the zone mechanic. We talk about what's going on in the zone as far as the physical environment. And then he or she may leave the zone, the huddle, and go to another zone and participate in that huddle as well. So we do find that they have a way to through cadence, work with the teams and get to that. But it's important that they're there. And what happens during this huddle meeting, it's a chance for the zone mechanic to say, hey, today at 10 o'clock, we're gonna be doing a generator exercise. So you might say, might see a blink in the lights or whatever's going on, those kind of things can be discussed. Or nursing staff can say, hey, we're going to be discharging patient in 322. So if you need to get in there as a zone mechanic to do anything, feel free. You'll have half an hour, whatever. So there's kind of a give and take during those huddles where the zone mechanic and the clinical team really work together. And it's pretty exciting to see as that relationship develops in there. And then the third part is managing corrective work requests identified by second or third shift or other shift folks. So there is a log that's at the nursing station for the after hours. Zone mechanic is just first shift. But then second and third shift, they do have a log that they would put in their work requests or go online and put in the work request, whatever is best for the unit. And then the zone mechanic, first thing in the morning, then looks at those previous shifts work, manages those up forward and gets those corrected as well. And then once the system is pretty mature, we actually do a patient interaction where the zone mechanic, once the zone has been repaired, once it's truly running as a zone maintenance program, the zone mechanic will then go into patient rooms and do a real quick, hi, this is George Mills, I'm your zone mechanic. Just making sure that your TV is working and that you're comfortable in the physical environment here. While they're asking those questions to the patient, they're looking into the bathroom to see if the sink is leaking or if there's any floor tiles that are loose, if there's any ceiling tiles that are askew or stained, and making mental notes of that. And usually, as I toured with our zone mechanics that have been doing this, I did one that was kind of neat. The zone mechanic had been there yesterday, and the next day when I was with them, he went in there and the patient had her brother there. And so as the zone mechanic said, hi, my name's Mike and I'm your zone mechanic. She said, hi, Mike, I remember you from yesterday. This is my brother, Bill, who's visiting today. And they introduced each other, and it was just so nice and comfortable, and everybody was very comfortable with it. And the patient said, that they had a little bit of trouble with the TV. And so the mechanic said, okay, I'll check back at that when you're down for physical therapy later today. And got in there and put new batteries in the remote, and it was fixed. It was just that easy. But what struck me was the comfortable level of the patient interaction with the zone mechanic and vice versa. That we were all there to make the environment better for the patient, and it was well received. So that's a much more mature program when we get to that level of patient interaction. But it is a goal for the program. So the formal inspection part of the program, the daily zone mechanic does their own inspection. They are guided by the building maintenance program that's, again, built into the rounding tool that we have through ATG. And really what happens is first hour and a half or so when nursing is doing most of the clinical work, the zone mechanic is then kind of free to do their own thing. And so that's where the structure comes in, where we have them looking for any doors that don't latch, any wires on pipe, or it's a 15-point inspection. They walk through and they do that real quick, and they write themselves corrective work orders for anything that's broken or needs to be repaired. And then throughout the rest of the day is when they get back to those things they've identified in that first initial sweep in the morning. And then that structures their day as far as what needs to be repaired. So if in the morning between 7 to 8:30 when they're doing their initial walkthrough and they identify 2 doors that fail to latch, then throughout the day they're going to have some time to get in there and fix those doors and repair the latching mechanisms to those, or whatever the issues are that they identify in that. And that's how we keep the zone then ready and in good repair. The inspection topics can either rotate each day or can be static, depends on how the zone mechanic wants to run it. Some of them like to just do doors on Monday and physical environment on Tuesday and above ceiling on Wednesday, or whatever they like to do. Others like to have the whole list of 15 and try to get as far as they can in their zone with those and score things. So there's a little bit of flexibility as far as how the zone mechanic wants to run their empire. But we do have a structure as far as what we expect to have be maintained in their built environment. Occasionally, they do discover deficiencies that are when the zone mechanic's not there. And so we have a communication log at the nursing station that they can handwrite something, or they can go into the computerized maintenance management system. Kind of depends on what the culture is of the organization, whether we want them to write work orders. One of the goals of zone maintenance is to reduce as many work orders as we can by being proactive in the space. So it's really what we try to do. And then again, as I mentioned, Monday through Friday, the first thing the zone mechanic does is looks at that log or looks at any correctives that were written overnight or second shift, and then repairs those and gets those back on track. If it's going to take more than something they could fix in the shift, the zone mechanic will respond back to the originator with an expected time frame, so that there's never any doubt from the originator of a request as far as when the work is going to be repaired and move forward. So, question?
Oh, I got it muted.
Okay. We'll keep going then. So the building maintenance program that I mentioned, this is kind of the heart of the program. Again, it's really our scheduled inspections, and that is developed by this building maintenance program. The buildings themselves are divided into zones, and a zone mechanic has that specific zone. And when I talk about implementation, we'll go over the size of zones and how we determine those for your buildings. Daily, the schedules are developed, and the BMP really applies traditional maintenance strategies to this life safety features. For example, with doors, I think we've talked about doors in the past, how strategy for doors are some high traffic doors are always beat up. Those doors are inspected every day. And there's other doors that are rarely used or used, the way they're supposed to be used and don't have much wear and tear. And those doors maybe are checked on a 6-month basis or an annual basis. So based on that, you'll either increase compliance or increase activities on certain areas and maybe ratchet down on others so that your work distribution is pretty leveled out during the day, and your building maintenance program should help leveling on that. So our static program, that the 16 things that we are looking at pretty much every day, we're taking a look at these, and some of these things don't pertain to all the units. For example, not everybody has grease producing devices, and not every area has a local area smoke detector like in a sleep room, and not every area has a portable space heater. So this list of 16 is your generic list. There's some things that are taken off the list based on where you're at and whatnot, but some things are always there. Piping issues, the 18-inch clearance, the escutcheons intact, those kind of things are pretty static to the day-to-day look-ats and that. So, but here's our list, and then we could go into each one of these areas and talk about them in greater detail. Critical care areas, the ventilation system certainly is, first thing we're looking at, airborne contaminants and things like that. Pressure relationships, if you have the ball on the wall or if you do the tissue test or whatever it is, the zone mechanic will be checking those on a daily basis for us in the critical care areas. And the zone mechanic that has those areas in his zone has a much smaller footprint to allow more time to be doing these on a daily basis for us. Some of the critical care areas that we identify or consider critical care are the operating rooms, the C-section rooms, any areas where the patient's diagnosed with immunocompromised diseases, and protective environments, those areas. So if those are the areas that are in the zone, again, the footprint of the zone is much smaller to allow for those. The non-critical areas for ventilation would be where we still look at pressure relationships, primarily in our sort of utility rooms to the egress corridor. And we're certainly aware of temperature and humidity issues that are in our zones as well. Some of the non-critical care areas would be your general care use in nursing units, utility rooms, labs, again, based on risk assessment, pharmacies, again, based on a risk assessment. These may move up into a critical care areas, labs and pharmacies. It depends on what's going on there for compounding versus not compounding and those kind of things. Non-critical, it also includes food prep areas and other areas based on a risk assessment. Everything that's static to our building maintenance program is fire barriers, maintaining fireproofing. Initially, of course, as I mentioned, it's really a repair system where we're going through and fixing things. But once everything's repaired, we're still doing above ceiling looks at, and we're doing checking our fire barriers for vertical, such as the walls, and also any penetrations through our floors. We're checking the condition of fire stop, for example, through a floor repair and these kind of things. So machine rooms, storage areas with exposed structural members, especially if you have fireproofing sprayed on it, make sure that it's intact. Any duct penetrations in our 2-hour barrier, they're looked at as well when we're doing above ceilings on our look-throughs. Make sure that the penetrations are installed properly and that they're working right. Fire door assemblies, again, these will ratchet up and down in frequency based on whether or not these are heavily used doors or not, but definitely positive latching is looked at. Self-closing devices are looked at. A lot of the key things, and this is the hazardous areas where the door closures are subject to failure. Looking at gaps, especially gaps related to weather and these things. Undercuts could be caused by shrinkage and these kind of things as well. So, and also covering on doors is not allowed, and especially coming up on the holiday seasons and that. So some of those things we looked at as well. And fire doors are not blocked in any way. The door inspections, of course, you do your annual and your rated doors. CMS would expect that you're doing an annual on all doors. So you want to kind of key in on that. So you definitely want to do that, and you want to identify what you're doing with that. So your annual door inspection process and your zone mechanics process should kind of be supported by each other. And whether your zone mechanic is doing the annual or not depends on whether they're qualified and skilled to do that. So you might want to consider that as part of your training program for your zone mechanics. Again, it depends on what how you want to support them on that. Hazardous areas, again, biggest thing here is separation from the room to the hallway, and that's with positive latching and or self-closing automatic closures. And of course, the walls, 1 hour construction, if not sprinkler or sprinkler protected. Smoke barriers, similarly to fire barriers, making sure that there aren't any holes or gaps in your compartmentation of that everything is sealed and in place as it's supposed to be, and dampers are tested as proper as per your program. Smoke barrier doors, of course, they don't latch, but they do have automatic closing devices, and the gap between the not to be more than 1/8 of an inch at the meeting edge. And of course, the undercut is looked at as well. Biggest thing with smoke barrier doors is being blocked by carts and things like that inadvertently. Quarter separation and quarter doors, as I mentioned earlier, CMS would expect us to be checking all of our doors. This include our patient care doors as well. So you want to do, be proactive in that. And I think the zone mechanic will be checking all of those door locations. My throat's drying up a little bit. Means of egress, quarter clutter. If you look at the top 10 findings, again, quarter clutter is still on the list, and carts and that is still there. So zone mechanic can be part of the solution to that, reminding staff of not having their carts parked places and that, not be charging computers on wheels in the corridor. If you have a dead end corridor, you might be able to get some relief by using some of that space up to 50 square feet. If more than 50 square feet, it becomes a storage area. So you want to be aware of that. But if you have a dead end corridor, you might be able to use some of that space for some of that corridor storage. Some things that the 2012 edition Life Safety Code do allow now is crash carts in use, isolation carts in use, the chemo carts in use can be stored in the corridors. And also things like wheelchairs and lifts can be actually stored in the egress corridor. However, if you do that, you need to have a fire plan that talks about what to do with that. And your zone mechanic might be part of the fire plan as far as helping relocate some of that equipment that's allowed to be stored in the egress corridor. Exit access, waiting areas open to the corridor, making sure that they're not blocking and migrating out into the egress corridor, but their waiting areas are segregated and separate from the egress corridor path as well. And then the exit access, make sure the furnishings and decorations aren't obstructing your egress signs and wayfinding signs and things like that. Of course, combustible decorations throughout the building aren't allowed, and these kind of things. So you want to be aware of, again, maintaining your egress corridor. And I think with the zone mechanics there, going into the holidays, there'll be another set of eyes to help manage and make sure that we're not getting in trouble with that. And then the egress side of the discharge, the means of egress, the third component is the exit discharge. Again, making sure that the exit's properly illuminated and there's no burned out light bulbs, and that the snow and whatnot, not much snow, but anything that could be a problem for your egress area is removed in that. So your zone mechanic might be part of that as well. Although most likely you're going to be leaving that with the grounds team, but make sure the door on the discharge side works with maybe your zone mechanic. Some electrical things, again, making sure there's no open J boxes. It's so easy to do work and then say, I'll come back later and put the cover on once I make sure that the project is terminated or whatever. And then you never get back. Next thing you know, you have an open J box. So bad habits can be turned around and replaced with good habits. Extension cords are not a permanent solution. And RPTs, easy, low hanging fruit for surveyors to find if they're improperly used. And so make sure that they're not in a great abundance there. Sprinkler system issues, biggest one here, of course, is your 18-inch clearance underneath the deflector. The sprinkler heads still shows up on findings all the time. And of course, the sprinkler system is not to be supporting anything else. And it's just a zero tolerance on that. So, and again, sprinkler heads aren't damaged. Just dirt and debris and Scotch tape on sprinkler heads. Make sure that those things aren't happening. And again, these are all things the zone mechanic can be looking at on a daily basis, walking through in that. So the med gas system, make sure the system is labeled properly and the labels are in place. So when they're doing their above the ceiling looks, they can be looking at the labeling on your med gas system, make sure the labels are in place and managing that. Managing the cylinder management, cylinders that are properly stored, make sure that they're stored and staff are trained properly on storing those and segregating. So again, it's just working with the clinical users on their cylinder management in the team. Then away chutes, biggest thing here is doors that are broken and that. So on a daily basis, check your latching on that if you have chutes and for trash or linen. And then, as I mentioned earlier, space heaters not allowed in patient care areas. Nursing stations in this situation are not allowed to have patient portable space heaters. If you do have them, make sure they have the tip off, shut off feature, and that they don't exceed 212 degrees boiling temperature. Non-sleeping staff rooms are allowed to have a portable space heater. So if you have a nursing office that's separate from the hallway and the egress corridor, and the person has a portable space heater, and that would be allowable, but you would probably want to not discourage that as much as possible. And local area smoke alarm, that's really like in a sleep room where you don't have a smoke detector, but an actual alarm that would wake up an occupant. These are often local and not hardwired to a panel. And so the zone mechanic would routinely check these and replace the batteries on that, whatever frequency is appropriate for that, probably 3 times a year. Grease producing devices, if you have these, the zone mechanic will have these in there. If they have the kitchen area, making sure that there's no daily buildup and these kind of things, that they're being properly cleaned and maintained. If you look at the fire reports in that, you know that the kitchen areas are the #1 source of fires. And so having the zone mechanic being proactively looking at grease producing devices and the maintenance of those would certainly be a proactive move for that. So that's your building maintenance program. Those are the things that we look at on a regular basis with the zone maintenance. And then the other thing is having a barrier management permit program to restrict access above the ceilings. #1 or #2 finding at Joint Commission's top 10 is still ceiling related issues, whether it's stained tiles or escutcheons being not in place, or holes in the walls and barrier issues and that. So the barrier management program really manages the access to the barrier above ceilings or whatever, and staff are adequately trained to repair and inspect those barriers. And then ongoing for going future is, restrict access. All vendors, contractors must have a permit granted by facilities and should be posted at their work area. Staff should be recognizing that if that person's on a ladder and they're working above the ceiling and they don't have that permit, they should be contacting security or facilities to come in and question what's going on in that area. Hopefully the zone mechanic will be aware of anybody doing work above the ceiling. But if they're not in the area, or if it's after hours, then that we have to have a process in place for that. So strong advocate of building barrier management permitting program. Train the staff to be another set of eyes and ears for anybody that's above the ceiling and they're working on the systems. Another part of staff training is with IT. There's no reason you can't give them a list of 2 or 3 approved cable installers that you vetted and that you work with that can be trained for your program and your system. And then if IT has that phone number, that's where they would call to do work. So it's kind of a way of managing the IT, but through staff training.
George, if I could interrupt, going back to zone maintenance, the zone maintenance program, a question came in, connected also what you were talking about before with the workforce. The zone maintenance program, so our program impacting facility staffing levels, what you've seen and what you expect for.
Rich, we're going there. We're going there right now. Let's talk about implementation of the program. So zone mechanics assigned to specific zones. And the coverage is first shift. As I mentioned, there's a logbook for second and third shifts. So how do we parse the building? So what's the size of that? So what we have found works is a zone mechanic can handle about 85,000 square feet if he has critical care areas. So if he's got ICUs, he's got some of the ORs, we'll split those up. That's kind of the critical care space. For general care areas, we think they can go up to about 100,000 square foot. And 125,000 if there's a lot of public space. So the person that has ground floor, the first floor with the big lobbies, and those areas gets more real estate because there's less critical care space going on. So those are our general rules of thumb. So for example, I was in a 400,000 square foot building 6 or 7 months ago, and we talked about putting this in place. It's 4 stories. So it turns out each story is about 100,000 square foot. And they had 4 guys. And so we talked about that, how to parse that. And so they had 4 people they could put into zone, and then they had support teams. So the way it works is, where the group is you take your team, you look at your building, you try to parse it as equally as you can, and then you identify two groups. One is your zone mechanic team, and the other is your support team. And the way it works is that your total engineering team is going to be either zone mechanic or supporting the zone mechanic. So the zone mechanic has this real estate that they're looking at, and they have the routine, they have the rounding that they're doing, and they're doing the repairs. The repairs of a zone mechanic is only going to be a repair that's going to take 2 hours or less. We don't want them spending any more than 2 hours on any project. So for example, if they have a toilet and it's plugged, they're going to plunge it, doesn't break through. They're going to use a toilet snake, 8 foot long, go as far as they can. It's still plugged. At this point, we're going to be into a couple hours. We're going to be into the point where the zone mechanic's going to have to pull it. Somebody's going to have to pull this thing off the wall and really rod and get in there and get aggressive with it. That's not going to be the zone mechanic. So at that point, he's calling downstairs and he's saying, "Hey, I need a plumber up on 3 West in room 412. We got a stuck stool," or whatever the problem is. So then the rest of the team, the non-zone mechanics, they're the support team. They're the ones that are doing the PMs on the boiler room. They're doing the PMs on the roof. They're doing the heavy lift and that kind of thing. And they're then servicing the needs of the zone mechanic when the zone mechanic can't handle that. So not everybody is a zone mechanic. You have the zone mechanics that are doing this day-to-day stuff up in the units. And what we have found is that the correct work orders drop off of the non-zone mechanics to the point where they're able to do their regular PMs on that with the heavy lift. And the zone mechanics is able to be up in the floors doing their thing. And the work equalizes once we get the zones repaired and they're fixing that. Then all of a sudden, all the correctives that everybody's been historically doing drops off. And then the support team is now able to really be a support and do the day-to-day operations of PMs and things like that are ongoing, allowing the zone mechanic to have the freedom to be doing his 100,000 square feet. So, and right away, the people, they see 100,000 square feet and they think, "Oh my God, that's huge." But when you realize that, really what you're doing is it's light duty work. You're doing just, general maintenance. And once the zones are repaired and now they're into maintenance mode, your 8-hour day is not spent doing a lot of heavy lifting. It's pretty much making sure that things are running the way they're supposed to be running. The needs of the clinical team is being met. And then your support team is really doing the heavy lift of the PMs on the on the air handlers. They're doing the filter changes and things like that. But the support team is also not now having to go in to do the filter changes on all those unit heaters in all the patient rooms. The zone mechanic will pick those up as part of his rounding. So the things that the support team used to do and have to go up to the floors to do and schedule time to do a sweep or whatever, all that time is given back to the support team to do the work that they need to do. And the zone mechanics are now freed up to do that lighter lifting or the more general work to do there. So you will find that you equalize the workload based on this. So, and we've done this in some smaller hospitals in our Kindred system, which are 2 or 3 people as a total maintenance team. We've still been able to parse zone mechanics, zone maintenance into that, where a lot of them will use every other day as a zone day, and then the off days are doing the other PMs and that. So you can move and modify. None of this is etched in stone. We've been able to be fairly flexible with how this works, but we do find that if we have kind of a structured program to this, it at least gives us a good framework to talk about doing this and going to move it forward in that. So we also have some skills assessment that, with JLL, I'm sure you all have access to skill assessment to see who your mechanics would be the best to go up and do that. We also do, in our world, we have personality index as well, where we can find some staff that are good public facing and other folks that you don't want to be public facing, that maybe wouldn't be a good candidate to be a zone mechanic. We do find that the zone mechanics in some of our more mature accounts where they're interfacing with patients as well as staff, you want to have the right personality to be in there. And I think you all know what I'm talking about. But anyways, we have seen that this thing's been able to work pretty well. Again, the concept is introduced to the clinical staff and non-clinical staff, through the unit meetings and things like that, as far as what's going to happen. I think if you kind of equivalize this to how EVS has done it over the years, where they have the unit housekeepers and they have project people doing floor finishing and things like that, it's kind of the same methodology that we use in maintenance, where we have the zone mechanic doing a lot of the stuff that's used to eat up our time with corrective maintenance and all that, the little things that just kind of eat up your day as you're and it gives that freedom back to your support team to be able to manage that larger things that they have to do on corrective maintenance. And again, with the 2-hour limit, you really find that then the zone mechanic is able to navigate and do their work on a daily basis. And if it's a project or something that's larger than they can handle, they're calling downstairs and they're getting somebody up there to do the work and getting it into the regular corrective work order maintenance program. So I don't know, it's been working in our systems and that. So, I welcome any questions or whatnot. And again, weekly is zone mechanic, the supervisor that will walk with them through their zone, make sure that the zones are going the way they're supposed to be going. Monthly zone mechanic, their supervisor and the department head or department supervisor will take a walk through the unit or their zones to make sure that things are going well. And then quarterly, the director of facilities and the nursing director do a tour through different zones and that for quality assessment and feedback to the teams. One of our more mature accounts, they, after about, I think, 18 months into it, they shifted all their zone mechanics over a zone for 1 quarter so they could see how their peers were doing their zones and that. So they're trying to learn from each other. So there is some fluidity to the program as far as trying to do some things like that to make things work. But we think with the touch points of the supervisor walking the zones with the zone mechanics, the monthly, and then with the department heads walking through it and whatnot, making sure that's working. We found at one site when we wanted to relocate a zone mechanic, and we got a lot of pushback from clinical folks. So they really liked who they had and they wanted to keep that person there. And so once nursing gets comfortable with the zone mechanic and gets used to the presence in the huddle, and the zone mechanic gets used to that, we find that the work up on the upper floors drops way off and allows us more time then to do more project stuff with our other maintenance teams and the support team to do that. So again, we find that it's working. Those numbers, those ranges, again, are just ballparks. You might find that you can go bigger. You might find that you have to go smaller. But again, I think that we found that we can make it work with the current staffing numbers that we have. So especially if your numbers are at the CSHE level at the 40,000 square foot per mechanic, I think is their number. JLL runs about 35,000 is our normal costing when we look at our book of business. So you might want to look at those, but when we find those numbers in that, we roll them up to find the zone mechanic can still work. So I know it's scary at first, and I think the biggest thing, we've all tried zone maintenance in the past. I know all of us have tried, because this is not brand new idea from George Mills, but it is a program that George Mills believes in, and George Mills believes it's going to work for you, because I've seen it work, and I've seen us modify it to make it fit the needs of the sites. The biggest lift, as I said earlier, is the first time through when you're doing repairs. You're going to go at a snail's pace, and it's going to be frustrating. The zone mechanic's going to, so if they got 100,000 square feet, and on Monday they walk the first 600 feet of it, and they found 3 doors that are failed and a hole in the wall. So all of a sudden they've got a day's worth of work, and they only spent, they only went a short distance in a unit. Eventually, they'll be further down the hall and further down the hall and get more and more done and identify things that. So it's the first time through is labor intensive. It is. And your support team, your carpenter and your painters and other folks, you might want to have them readily available to help up on the floors and that with his own team until we get at least to where it can be maintained. Again, it's called zone maintenance, not zone repair. The first time through it is zone repair. But once you get things fixed and running, then you really get into more of a cadence, and that 100,000 square feet becomes palatable to where the zone mechanic can really keep up on their stuff and that going forward. If you have a mobile engineering service in your system or that, you might find that during the first time through with the high amount of repairs that have been done, maybe you can tag some of your mobile engineering folks to come in and help the zone mechanics get through their zones the first time through to really get them up to move from a zone repair up into the zone maintenance type of a position with that. So I mentioned that we use ATG rounding tools. I don't know if you have this available or not, but this is a picture of the program, how it's set up by zones. And then at each zone, it drills into the daily work that's given to the mechanic, and he goes through and he checks his boxes and he makes sure he does the work. And then if there is correctives that's going to take more than 2 hours, he can write a work request and it goes into the CMMS program and gets us there in that. So when we look at the top 10 findings from the Joint Commission, these are the things that we have the zone mechanic keying in on. It's the safety catch-all, the doors that are blocked and that, it's the sprinkler piping issues. It's the getting the work done on the high risk items. A lot of those are your unit heaters up in the nursing units and that. Shut off controls, labeling, and you can see the list here. And you can see how the zone mechanic has got the responsibility for making sure that these are the things that are not going to get you in trouble. So when survey happens, we have somebody that's accountable. I remember when I rolled this out in the very first time in 2003 at a hospital that I was running, and we identified who was going to be the zone mechanics, and I had business cards made up for the zone team, and it said, the guy's name and zone, the zone title. And when I gave it to one of the guys, this guy was 52 years old. I'll never forget this. I handed him his box of business cards, and his eyes literally watered up, and he held these cards, and he said, "George, I've never had a business card before." It seems kind of goofy now when I think back on it, but it made he was so moved that he was being recognized as being a key player to the patient care environment that, he did. I mean, it was really a powerful thing. And I think when you roll this out, if you do it well and get your zone people to really buy into what they're doing here, and the fact that they are the face of facilities, they're the face to the public, they're the face to the clinical team. When you pick those folks to do that and then support them with the rest of your team, you're going to be excited. It's going to hit you. You're just going to say, "Why haven't I been doing this before?" So hopefully that answers your questions on the implementation of it and the size and the range. So I'll take any other questions until we're out of time. Joe, kind of watch the time for me, okay? So any other questions you want to talk about?
Sure. So we have one question that came in through the chat, relevant to California, and maybe a case study for one of our clients that has many hospitals in California, Adventist Health. Maybe a case study, we could talk about how our program is implemented at Adventist.
Yeah, again, Rideout is the 400,000 square foot building I was talking about earlier. And, when we talked to the team about doing this, they were pretty excited about trying it. So we've also been putting it into some kindred sites now down in the LA area. So they're kind of in the early stages of going in there as well. So those are some of the sites that have got it in place. And again, it's a tough lift the first time through. And, I'm not going to try to sugarcoat it, but once you get through the maintenance repair phase and move into the maintenance, things go pretty well with the program. Any other questions, Rich?
I have one if I can jump in real quick.
Sure, Joe.
Based on, what you've seen in the past where you've implemented, does this interaction with the clinical staff and the patients increase Hcap or any of the scores or the outcomes that, are so important to our healthcare leaders and our patients?
That's a really powerful question. The Hcap scores, I don't know if you guys all know this, but CMS, they evaluate how every hospital does. That's the whole reason for accreditation, and that is to distribute the funds through Medicaid and Medicare to the organizations. So what they do is they hold back 2% of the reimbursements for the Medicare claims that are presented to the CMS. You all understand that CMS is essentially an insurance company. So they hold back 2%, and then they look at 4 things, and one of those things is under the Hcap scores. So one of those 4 contributors to getting your 2% is for innovative things that you're doing. And so we've seen hospitals put in the zone maintenance program, and then when they do their submittals to CMS, they put in for innovation for that year that they put in a zone maintenance program, and they've gotten their 0.5% of their money came back through innovation on that. The other 3 criteria deal with patient satisfaction scores, and I can't think of the other 2 off the top of my head, but so one of the 4 was innovation, and we've been able to use the zone maintenance program as an innovation at that hospital system. So they got their money, and we're talking real money. I mean, you think of 2% of the millions of dollars that are reimbursed back to your organizations, and to get 1/2 of one of those back just based on something that we've done here in facilities. It's a pretty powerful thing to bring forward to your leadership team and going forward. Unfortunately, it's a one of. I mean, once you got your innovation, you can't innovate twice. But that first time when you can do that, and then there's a couple other things with the patient satisfaction scores we're seeing with the zone maintenance program in place. The patients have recognized that. The more mature programs, they have tent cards in there where it says, "Hi, my name's Mike," and maintaining your room. We could get the results back from some of those things too. So we have seen, although I can't point my fingers at specific results where I can say that patient satisfaction has come out of this. I don't have that going on yet, but we think that as our program gets more mature, we'll be able to get some of that data back to us as well. So we are kind of, my team is just this past year, I'm fully staffed now to really push this into our system. So even though we've been in healthcare for 12 years as a JLL company, the zone maintenance program is it's kind of young for us. We've pushed it in over the years at Mainline in Philadelphia and some other sites. Some of the advanced sites have been welcoming to it over the past couple of years, but this has really been our biggest year of the push for zone maintenance. So we're still waiting to see some things. A lot of things that I've done anecdotally in my career is what I'm referring to as well. So, but we're kind of all in this together.
Thanks so much. We've had a zone maintenance program here at UCI for a number of years. And the other thing I'd add to this is the relationship that's formed with the care providers, the clinical team, and our maintenance staff. It's something that it takes years to develop, but once it is there, it's just like security in the emergency department. They become part of the team. They're part of the care plan. The clinicians know that they have another resource to reach out to, and it's a really great collaboration and something we should all strive for. Because getting back to what I asked, I think it does improve outcomes because it gets things done quicker, so the clinicians can then get to their important job, taking care of the patients, and make it a more environment just more conducive to care.
Absolutely.
So, thanks so much for this presentation. I think we got through almost all the questions. Does anyone else have any questions for the two presenters?
Yeah. I think, Joe, we have a couple comments.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Greg, thank you for your comment. Greg Duncan just commented here, talk about the suggested square footage for zone mechanics and 2-hour limit for work orders. He liked the business card idea, George, so that story that you shared about. What else? He says describe the zone maintenance system would be a more efficient work model in most circumstances. And then he talked about his ODB benchmark for 2021 that his organization uses is over 50,000 square feet per FTE. So thank you for the comment, Greg. Stephanie had a question. This is a great question. Their hospital is a small hospital with a staff of 4. Any suggestions on how to implement this with a smaller facility?
As I mentioned, our kindred sites are about that size. They're smaller hospitals. They don't have ORs in them, so the critical space is a little bit less than some of the typical hospitals. But what they've done is they've done 2 things. One is they'll do zone mechanics, their zone maintenance every other day. So they kind of alternate that. So because they're short staffed, they got to do the heavy lifting PMs. And then on the other day, they're doing the zone maintenance where they're up in the zones and they split the building up between the 3 or 4 guys. And then they do that. So they kind of modify it to where it's partial zone maintenance and partial support team for that. And if they're in their zone mode and they find something that's got to be repaired, then they step out of that and they go into more of a corrective mode. But we have seen in some of the smaller sites where you think I don't have enough people to do it, that we can still do a modified version of it. So.
Yeah, with that, I think we've gone through the questions in the chat. We might have time for one final question, but thank you.
Rich, no question, but I just want to thank you and George. George, great to see you again. We just briefly met at Boston. I know I grew up my career as a life safety surveyor for the last 17 years, attending your mentoring and all the standards. I just have a question now. The behind on the screen and the background, are those all standards or findings from different hospitals, George? So
this is my home office, and you'll see my reel-to-reel and my stereo, and the blue books there are the 2012 NFPA library codes. And over here behind me is my 101 and all that, those codes over there. So this is where I live. This is my home. This is my home office. And so a lot of it goes on, so a lot of it's literature. So yeah, it's
perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much,
Thank
George
you.
and Rich. Thank you, Joe, for hosting. Yeah.
Thank you, Narasimha.
So,
All right, I think that's about it then, everybody. We really appreciate you all joining. George, Rich, thank you so much for this information. As mentioned, we try to do these quarterly, so please be on the lookout for the next one. And as also mentioned, this is recorded. So with all this great information that was shared, I know we can go and then share with our team. So please feel free to do so. And if you don't have access to it, that means you're not a member. So reach out to Beth and become a CSHE member. Otherwise, we will see you next time. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Thank you.
thank
everyone.
you. Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.